We have only a few minutes for questions, but can I ask the speakers to return to the panel? And I'm just going to rephrase that, or repeat that quote, that wonderful quote. Yesterday we heard Andrew Padmos bring out what had to be one of the best lines ever, that CPD is a state of mind. But I think, John Quinn, you've trumped that with the, what is it, bullying is no longer a competency for surgeons. And it came from a surgeon. It came from a surgeon. Can I just take Chairman's privilege and ask a question of Jocelyn Lockyer? Jocelyn, in terms of from theory or pilot to practice, what do we know so far about the bigger rollout of R2C2 and that whole concept of how do we make this work in the broad environment?
Well, you know, it's being developed by a bunch of academics, so the rollout isn't really in our purview. I think that what we're doing is engaging with the regulators to see if we can get some traction there. We're also trying to get some funding to test it in residency education, because I think that the model applies. It's been tested to some degree informally in residency. I think if we can work from the bottom up, because in residency everybody has to do sessions with their supervisor or the program director, so that will help if we work bottom up, and then we're starting to talk to the regulators. And then we're working on a publication. We've got I call it a cheat sheet, which I found I didn't bring with me, but a 2-page cheat sheet on how to go about it. And we're talking about putting that into something called MedEd Portal, which is the AAMC's, Association of American Medical Colleges, has a website where you can put learning materials, which are peer-reviewed, and that would also help us disseminate it. So I think we're a bit far from prime time, but certainly working on it.
Okay, so we'll put that as a question on notice to Bill and Craig and people like that for further rollout. Thank you. So Barry.
Yeah, my question is to Joanna primarily. I was involved with as a reviewer for an interstate colleague for what was quite clearly a vexatious claim, and I just wondered what the board's view is on how you handle the unprofessional conduct of a medical practitioner who makes such a claim.
So the law allows the board not to investigate a complaint if it believes that it's vexatious or doesn't meet any of the grounds of professional conduct. It's always vexing for someone to receive a complaint, and the legal test about vexatious is actually a very stringent test. So normally, unless there's clear evidence that somebody has made a complaint out of self-interest, which usually doesn't exist, certainly not at the point the complaint comes in, the board will investigate it. If at the end of the process there's clear evidence that somebody made a complaint for improper reasons, then the board can take action under the requirements of, that in itself is unprofessional, or the protections which are provided normally for the notifier are only there if a notification is made in good faith. So if there's clear evidence that the notification is not made in good faith, the practitioner themselves has some recourse legally. But in most cases, a matter will have to be investigated if it's of serious enough in its prima facie, no matter that at the end of the day it may be shown that there wasn't anything in it, and there may be suspicion that somebody made it for other than reasons other than to do with the protection of the public. I can see some of the other regulators in the room nodding. These problems are common.
Thanks, Joe. John Myers, we can take a question, not a statement, please.
No, that's a pleasure. The first question is, if you're going to, I think Jocelyn perhaps, what's being addressed on the one hand by regulators is in the interest of the public. Now, in your programs have you assessed is not in the public interest, and how have you assessed that your program has addressed anything that's not in the public interest?
I'm going to have you Repeat that, sorry.
The bottom line is people want to know, or let's say regulators want to say, what they want, that they exist because they are protecting the public.
Right.
Now, there's no evidence that there is any need to protect the public. How do you regulate yourself to see that you actually are protecting the public by having all these programs? And the same goes for the medical board. Apparently, after the there was a Senate inquiry into APRA, and they were recommended to regulate themselves. Now, they've never been validated. How are they going to be revalidated?
John, can we
the bottom line is,
please,
how's the public interests
can we stop
served
that?
by revalidation?
Jocelyn Lockyer is not a regulator. Jocelyn is an education academic.
I understand, but that's why the two things are mixed up. One is to accredit, and the other is to deregulate.
Sorry, you've had a go at a question. You've had another go to clarify the question. Jocelyn is not a regulator, but may well want to try to answer the question.
I think in the university setting, we have accreditation processes of our undergraduate residency and continuing medical education programs. Those are done by external people, and their role is to make sure we're compliant with the standards that have been nationally agreed to. The extent to which the public is involved in setting those standards, not necessarily, but certainly for some of our educational programs, the public is involved. But Dr. Doherty is quite correct. I am not a regulator. That maybe Dr. Pope can have a go at that later.
Thanks. On the right.
Neil Strugnall, Northern Health, Melbourne. I'm a surgeon. A question for Joanna Flynn. In an earlier session, we heard from Craig Campbell about the levels of availability to the public of information that may be gained in respect to any practitioner who is undergoing a performance review process. Where information may have been provided by health networks or college CPD programs, can you comment on the Medical Board of Australia's levels of availability to the public of information that may have been obtained? Is there a qualified privilege process, and what are the levels and layers within that?
So the only information that's available to the public through the medical board is where there are restrictions or conditions placed on a practitioner, or where they're in a formal public disciplinary hearing. So if information is provided to the board that it uses for its investigative processes, that's one thing. And if there's a case based on that information that a practitioner has to answer, that information would be provided to them. But in terms of anything going into the public, the only thing that goes into the public arena are proceedings held in public, or ultimately things that appear on the register as conditions, restrictions or cancellation of registration.
Can I ask, does that include lawyers who may sort of fish for information as well?
Sorry, just say that again.
What about lawyers involved in prosecution in regard to cases? Can they access MBA information above and beyond what the public can access?
No, they can't. If a person who made a notification may make a freedom of information request about material in the board's file, and that would go through the normal freedom of information things about what things under the law should be revealed or not. So I guess potentially there might be some things there that would, but not from a lawyer. And I'm not an expert in freedom of information law to be able to give you, to rehearse what bits would be released and what wouldn't.
Thank you. A final quick question over here.
The Productivity Commission in 2013 for that year announced that there were 107 serious medical errors in 53 million patient interactions annually in Australia, and that included 34 patient suicides. Would you consider, Joanne, having the Productivity Commission do an evaluation on any of your final deliberations about the future of the revalidation process?
Sure.
And on that note, I suspect we can probably break for afternoon tea. Did you want to? Did you want to elaborate on Shaw? No. Thank you, folks. Caffeine and sugar is outside.